Hi, it's Gita with an update on President Trump's use of emergency powers to enact broad-based tariffs. The International Trade Court initially ruled that President Trump's use of these emergency powers was illegal. The Trump administration appealed that decision, and the appeals court upheld the lower court orders, but they stayed their own order until October 14th to give the president time to appeal again to the Supreme Court, which of course he did. This week, the Supreme Court agreed to consider that case on an emergency basis, and oral arguments are set to begin the first week of November. The ability to impose tariffs is squarely within the domain of the Congress. However, the president does have some powers to impose tariffs for certain conditions. In this particular case, it's the reciprocal tariffs and the trafficking and immigration tariffs, which have been challenged and which so far 2 courts have said exceeded his authority. President Trump has also imposed some tariffs under different legal authorities, such as the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, which is what he used to impose tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, and those tariffs are not being challenged in this case. So we expect the Supreme Court to hear the case in the beginning of November and issue a ruling. Now, if they decide that the president did have legal authority to impose these kinds of reciprocal and immigration and trafficking-based tariffs, that will be a huge amount of power taken from Congress and given to the president. The Supreme Court upholds the lower court. That's where it's really going to get interesting. It's not entirely clear what would happen. Any new trade agreements that have already been negotiated, and there have been a number with the UK, with the EU, with Japan, those would still be enforced. There's no reason those agreements would become invalid. What would happen to the tariffs that have already been paid? The United States has already collected $183 billion in tariffs in 2025. We have the highest effective tariff rate that we've ever had in my lifetime. And it's not clear if the Treasury will have to pay those tariffs back to the importers if the Supreme Court decides that President Trump exceeded his authority in levying those tariffs. There is historical precedent for the Treasury having to return tariff monies when they were collected illegally, though. But while we wait for a decision, the tariffs remain in place, and the impacts of those tariffs have been felt across our economy. Although importers were trying to hold the prices steady for a period of time, we're already starting to see prices go up, with most economists estimating that the cost of the tariffs in terms of increased price of goods and services for U.S. consumers will cost the average family between $2,000 and $3,000 this year. The rationale for imposing the tariffs in the first place was to increase domestic manufacturing, but so far the manufacturing industry in 2025 has so far shed tens of thousands of jobs, and overall economic growth has slowed down considerably.